Okay, good evening everyone. We'd like to welcome you to the My Horse University and Extension's Horse Quest live webcast titled Feeding Management in a Time of Rising Feed Prices. The presenter tonight is Dr. Mark Russell. Mark is a professor of animal science and veterinary clinical sciences at Purdue University. He earned his college degrees at Cornell University and the University of Illinois before moving to Indiana in 1982. Since 1975, he has served as an extension horse specialist and has advised horse owners on issues of horse selection, facilities, nutrition, pastures, breeding, and general management. He also teaches horse anatomy and performance evaluation, horse management, and clinical horse nutrition. He has judged breed, open, and forage shows for 32 years and has coached many winning forage and collegiate judging teams at national competitions. Please note that you are able to ask questions during the presentation via the text chat at the bottom of your screen. During the presentation, the questions will be answered by Dr. Colleen Brady and Dr. Christine Skelly. Colleen is an associate professor and extension specialist in the Department of Youth Development and Ag Education at Purdue University. Chris Skelly is a co-founder and the director of curriculum for My Horse University and also is an associate professor in the Department of Animal Science at Michigan State University. Also, at the end of the presentation, there will be time for additional questions that you may have for Dr. Russell. The presentation from tonight will be recorded and uploaded to our website if you'd like to review it at a later date. And at this time, I'd like to turn the presentation over to Dr. Russell.
Thank you, Gwen. I was tempted to turn my volume down a little bit when Gwen was speaking, but this is the level that I'd like to speak and go through our discussions for this evening, and encourage you to chat in your questions and ask if you have those. And at the end, as she said, we can direct some specific things that you want to answer, the questions you have. Gwen's introduction made me sound really, really old, and I guess I am experienced, but I don't know any more than you do about feeding your own horses. So the thing we really need to emphasize is my goal is that you understand a little bit better about basic horse nutrition 101, if you will, about why forages are important and how we're going to build a ration around forages, but at the same time, you signed up to try to figure out how you could reduce your input costs, and that may or may not be the end point with which we end up, but I hope you have a better sense of what's possible and what you want to be able to do with your horse program. So I'm going to kind of dive literally right into the horse and discuss nutrition as it relates to digestive physiology and why we feed the horse the way we do. First of all, I think all of our feeding programs should be based on what the horse is able to digest and how they're designed. We're going to spend a little bit of time talking about some basic review of general nutrition and feeding, and if you have questions, again, Dr. Skelly and Dr. Brady can answer those as we go along. It's real important, as we'll see in the text in the next few slides, that the horse has to have a healthy mouth. We're going to talk about teeth in a little bit, but he's got to be able to salivate and be able to moisten and begin the digestion. And then all the feed goes down through this long garden hose sort of apparatus that connects the mouth, if you will, directly into the stomach. The stomach of the horse is relatively small. This diagram makes it look, in my mind, larger than 10% of the digestive capacity, which is what it is. And if you think about how we're going to be able to digest, what really happens is if you feed more than the stomach can hold, then you're going to shove that meal before it's digested very well on into the small intestine. There's about 100 feet total that we'll see in a second, but most of the length of the tract is in the small intestine where a lot of digestion takes place, but the forages, for the most part, go on through the small intestine into a large vat of bacteria and protozoa called the colon, the cecum, and then on into the rectum. So let's look at see how the horse manages to digest what we're feeding it, if you will. And I'm trying to always relate, not just to give you a lecture in anatomy, but to relate how the digestive tract dictates how we should feed the horse and how it's going to try to digest whatever we throw at him, literally. This 100 feet is a typical 1,200 pound light riding type breed of horse, and what I said earlier is the stomach is very small, so if you're going to feed more than 5 or 6 pounds of a concentrate in a day to a horse, then that needs to be divided up into frequent smaller meals so the horse can fully digest the feed stuff before it goes then on into the small intestine to be further digested and, more importantly, absorbed. So like a pig, like humans for that matter, the horse is going to digest in the small intestine, absorb in the small intestine exactly the quality of the feed that it eats, like what we call a non-ruminant. Some of you would argue that the horse is really a post-gastric ruminant, meaning the rumen or the bacteria population is posterior to the small intestine where most of the nutrients are absorbed. So then the digester goes on into a small intestine. This is a very long absorptive process where mostly, as it says here, the little parts of the protein or the amino acids are absorbed. Most of the glucose and soluble carbohydrates are absorbed. The polysaccharides are broken down to glucose at this point. And when you add fat to the diet, as we'll talk about, we'll see that this is an opportunity to add fat, add a lot of energy, but the reality is we increase calories, but it's also digested in the small intestine. We're going to get to some rules of thumb in feeding as we go along, but continue to ask your questions, and they magically get answered by Dr. Scully and Dr. WEIGHTI. What's not digested in the small intestine, or isn't soluble, if you will, by mammalian enzymes, goes into the cecum and then into the colon. That's where there's actually bacteria populations that live healthfully, and they're supposed to be there. There's cellulitic bacteria usually that break down the cellulose that's in the hays. The horse is probably 65% of the digestive tract is in the in the large intestine, in the cecum, and these bacteria break down the cellulose in the hay or the pasture to what's called volatile fatty acids. They become the primary source of energy for the horse. However, in the cecum and in the colon, whole amino acids are not absorbed, only the nitrogen and the ammonia and the byproducts from the protein. So the end product, and the reason that horses have road apples instead of a loose stool like cattle would have, is that water is reabsorbed into the body, but the bacteria are not absorbed. There is urea absorbed, and a lot of the bacteria protein, the bacteria themselves, end up going out in the manure, and the horse can't really take much advantage of that protein as a feedstuff. So if you feed a poor quality hay, then that's the quality of hay that gets through the small intestine and goes on into the large intestine. I want to just go over some basic nutrition. We're going to get to some items of how to save money or how to reduce the cost, or more importantly in my mind, improve the efficiencies of digestion. But the problems I see when most people have come to me with feeding problems are they're feeding a lot more concentrate than they need. And we're going to come to some rules of thumb here in just a little bit, but there should always be more forage in a diet, more pasture, more hay than there is concentrate. And when I say concentrate, I'm talking about the grains and the supplements and all that. Consequently, the particle size gets too small, so the rate of passage goes through the horse too quickly, and that usually means that the horse is not digesting it as well. The timing of exercise, the time of feeding. If you're going to feed 2 or 3 times a day, then the horse needs an hour or two to truly digest and absorb those nutrients before we're going to exercise him and cause the blood flow to go to the muscles in the periphery and away from the digestive tract. So if you're going to work horses directly after a feeding, then you're just inviting more problems. Horses usually in the wild and out on pasture would nibble 70 or 80% of the time. Some of you are probably nibbling and eating now, and that's increasing your digestibility of your feedstuffs because a little bit is being digested at one time. So we got to be really careful. If you're going to have horses in a boarding stable and you're going to feed them at 6 o'clock at night and then all the boarders come and ride at 7 or 8, that's usually inviting problems. So we really need to think about when we're going to use the horses and when we're going to feed. Water availability, we now have actually liquid water in most of the upper Midwest now, and it's beginning to get very lush in the pastures. So we got to be sure that we don't have dehydration colics and other digestive problems because of freezing water or water that's contaminated, water that smells real bad, and consequently horses don't choose to drink it and back off. So we've got to talk about a lot of issues that can relate to the management of horse nutrition, and of course that relates to the general health. Those that are not well cared for in their parasite contamination, those that have teeth problems, those that have other metabolic diseases certainly are going to have more nutrition related problems as well. So, and it seems, I don't know about you, but the horses that stay at home and do absolutely nothing seem to have nothing ever happens to them. It's only the good horses that we're breeding, we're training, we're riding, we're transporting, we're doing things with them. Those are the ones that seem to have the most problems in general management. So these are just some general things. We also need to remember that not all of your horses at home are the same. We have a number of what I call pasture ornaments, maintenance horses that don't do anything. They only have to eat and look pretty and stand in your pasture and you're happy. And those horses have pretty low requirements, and it's pretty easy to feed them, and consequently a lot of different people feed horses very, very differently because their requirements are so low. The highest density of feed needs to be in these really young weanling horses that are growing very fast and are even still suckling on their mares this time of year. They have to get, and we'll show you some of these levels, but in a simple way. So they need the highest density or concentration of feedstuffs. The last 2 or 3 months of pregnancy, we know the requirements for energy and protein go up considerably, but I'd like to really emphasize, if any of you have brood mares, the requirements for minerals are going up really in the 2nd or 3rd month. So the skeleton of the horse, the calcium, the phosphorus, the magnesium, other minerals are really important that they're increased within the first 2 or 3 months of pregnancy and not wait for these last 3 months. What makes the horse industry so unique is the fact that we work horses harder and harder and harder, more like athletes. I know some of your horses aren't very athletic right now, but the goal is to get them to all be ready to run this weekend, maybe in the big races. So we have high levels of energy that are required, and we'll mention those as we look at energy requirements here in a minute. We also have a lot of what you call senior horses. We have 3 horses that are over 33 years of age in our barn right now. Those are loved and cherished horses by their boarders, and one of them happens to be owned by my wife, so it seems like it's going to be around forever. But the reality is horses are living longer because of better health care and better management and a lot of conditions, but we have to consider how their digestive tract is changing as they get older and older. Just to come back to some general guidelines, and I see some of you are asking about how much and how little and all of that, and there's going to be a lot of details that I'm not going to be able to address in the next 40 minutes, but the reality is horses are going to eat about 2 to 2.5, maybe 3% of their body weight in dry matter. Now what we mean by dry matter is that's the solids that are in the feed that allow the horse to actually get the nutrients. The rest of it is water. So right now, if they're out on pasture and they're eating some lush grass, probably that's only about maybe 15% dry matter and the rest is water. Those of you feeding mostly hay and dried harvested products, probably 90% of the product is dry matter. So what we mean by dry matter, that means a 1,000-pound horse is going to eat about 25 pounds of actual dry matter. They'll eat more feed than that, about 10% more feed if it's hay and harvested forages. So what this means is you need to know whether this is a Clydesdale that weighs 2,200 pounds or a miniature that weighs 300 pounds. they're going to eat proportionally to their body weight. Always should be more forage than grain. That means 1.5%, 2%. Somebody says, can you feed too much hay? Only if the horse is getting obese, and that's too many calories. It's not really too much hay. I would love to have 2.5% of its body weight be simply provided by the forage, and that would meet all the nutrient requirements. That might be the most ideal for the horse, but then we need to think about adding, of course, water. This is a rule of thumb. There's nothing magical about this, but 1 gallon of water per 100 pounds of body weight. So those of you that are watering horses 3 pounds, a 3-gallon bucket once a day, that's probably not enough for most of your horses. That doesn't mean they have to have water in front of them all the time, but they need to have access to good, clean water. I have lots of examples of horses that have water that was contaminated with biologicals, meaning bacteria and protozoa and other problems. Give them digestive upsets, or it smells bad and they won't drink it. So there's all kinds of related issues here. Horses need to be regularly exercised. In my experiences, horses really need to be athletes, and they need to be exercised. I've never heard, and we're going to talk about body condition scoring in a little bit, but I've never heard anyone stop along the side of the road and complain because the horse is too obese. But rather, they will complain when they can see the ribs and the hips. But the reality is, a lot of the diseases that you deal with, the colics, the laminitis, the muscle tying up problems, bone growth problems in young foals, are directly related to excess feed and not enough exercise. So these are just general guidelines. I've put some tables in here, and will not spend a lot of time on those, but just to point out that the digestible energy, or the calories, if you will, that the horse needs goes up dramatically when we increase the amount of work from, here it says 0.8 megacalories per pound of feed. So you can do that with hay. You can't get over about 1 megacalorie of energy in forages, in hay. So whenever you see light work, moderate work, intense work, if you put it on a per day basis, horses, 1,000-pound horses, would need around 16 megacalories of energy just to live, maintenance. And that can go as high as 40. These horses that are going to run Saturday in the big thoroughbred race, they're going to need around 40 megacalories of energy every day to maintain their body condition score and their weight. You can see protein also increases. These protein levels seem really low to some of you, but the reality is these are based on nitrogen balance, and the protein requirement as a percent of the feed stuff in the feed is really pretty low when horses aren't doing anything. And as you can see, it increases, but it doesn't increase to as high a level as some of you are feeding in protein. So maybe you're overfeeding protein. Maybe some of you whose stalls get pretty wet and the horse urinates a lot, or the urine looks dark colored, the barn starts to smell more of ammonia. Maybe it's because not just bad ventilation, but it might be because we're feeding too much protein. Compare those numbers we just looked at with horses in the last 90 days, the mares that are pregnant. This is, again, you can't do this just with hay. Lactation, that's about the same as it was for performance horses at high levels. And then this baby weanling that's just walking, excuse me, I'm going to stop reading the chat questions while I'm talking here, that is still growing really, really fast, has the highest density. So what we talked about was fairly low protein levels for performance in non-pregnancy. It goes up the last 3 months of pregnancy. Lactation is higher yet. So the only animals really that ought to be getting a high protein diet of calcium and protein would be an alfalfa, or these high levels would be this lactating mare and this really fast growing baby. Otherwise, I think you're probably overfeeding protein. So a number of different questions have come up as far as what do we mean by light work, moderate work, and intense work. And these are described in other references that you have and other places you can find on E-Extension and My Horse University. But light work is mostly walking, a little bit of trotting. moderate work is beginning to lope and work and exercise, and it really isn't so much about the speed, but it is whether the body is able to use oxygen as a source of energy, digestion, energy, utilization. And when we get what we call very aerobic exercises, very intense, without oxygen, those are racing speeds, those are jumping horses, those are cutting horses, those are even dressage horses at the moments that they're doing this intense work. So these levels we talk about of exercise are based on how hard and how intensely you're exercising your horse. And before we go into body condition score and some of these other issues, I think we should really emphasize that every one of your horses are different. Some are what you refer to as easy keepers, those horses that want to be in a higher body condition score. They want to gain weight, they want to founder, they want to have heavy crests on their neck and so forth, just looking at the hay. And we have some of those in our barn. And we have other horses that have very intense and high levels of metabolic rates, and those are harder to keep. My wife doesn't like those as boarders because you have to feed them a lot more concentrate. Even those pasture ornaments that are out in the back, some of them are a lot fatter than others. So you know your horses. You look at your horses, you feel your horses. You're the ones that have to decide whether these horses are being fed enough or too much. And that's the first point. I have 10 points, I think, on these two lists of things that we need to look at and say, well, how could we reduce our feed costs? How could we do a better job? So I'm of the opinion this isn't just about how to feed them in tough times, if you will, but the reality is how to make sure we're doing a better job utilizing the feedstuffs that we have. So the first is, and I'm going to go through not all of these, but most of these, and ask your questions as we go along, but some of these we may have already answered, and others we're going to go. It's hard for me to decide how much all of you already know. There's a wide variety of folks out there that obviously know as much as I do or more about these topics. So the first thing is everyone thinks that they know exactly what their horses should look like as far as how fat should they be. Some of you very well know that if you have a distance horse, a competitive trail horse, or an endurance horse, or a thoroughbred race horse, or a performance hunter or jumper horse, excess fat is just getting in the way. I tell my wife I'm just storing up for work so I can get extra fat in the winter because I might work. I might need it next summer. The reality is we're causing more metabolic diseases in horses just like we are in these horses. If you're not familiar with the body condition scoring system, you should become so, because when you put your hands on a horse, the question is how much of the skeleton can you feel and how much of it can you see. If you can see the ribs, it's below a 5. If the vertebrae thicken up, then it's probably below a 5. So 5 is what most people would say is ideal. This is actually a scoring system that was set up based on reproductive physiology years ago, and if an animal is extraordinarily thin, maybe they don't have enough body fat to cycle normally and be a reproductive efficient mare. If they're too obese, maybe they will cycle, but they may have so much fat around their reproductive tract that they're not going to conceive and maintain a pregnancy. So Don Henneke did this work with the idea that a lot of people used to get mares thin at the beginning of the breeding season and then increase their body weight through the breeding season. And he found they're a whole lot better if you just keep them at between 4 and 6. And I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here, but you need to feel the horses in order to body condition score them. If you want your horses at body condition of 6 or 7, then that's fine, but realize that's going to take more feed. And it may not be as healthy for the horse in the long run, for sure. So we're of the opinion, based on most of the health data that we see, that between 4.5, 5, 5.5, up to 6 is a pretty healthy range of horses. If you can put all the shampoo that your horse needs to give him a bath in the crease behind his withers, or the birds land there in a bird bath, this horse is not very healthy. But that's not the issue. My point tonight is that horses take more money, more calories to keep in an over weight condition, and maybe that's a place you can economize and save a little bit of feed. I think we've already touched on this area, but calories is what we're talking about. Fat is what we're talking about when we talk about body condition scoring. So if you look and say, I think he's too fat, you don't need to reduce the vitamins and minerals. You may need to reduce the protein, but most of all, you reduce the energy. So if you're building to determine what the horse needs, you weigh him, you determine what he's doing, you figure out what's 2.5% of his body weight in forage, and you determine if that provides enough energy. If you can provide enough energy with that and then add minerals and vitamins and water, bingo. He's probably a healthy horse and you're doing well. Then you add concentrate if needed for calories. Then you determine if you need to add a supplement with some protein and minerals. Then you look at other supplements. Most people overdo the bottom 2 lines here and maybe the bottom 3 lines as far as expensive parts of feeding. A little bit on pasture. I don't want to go into a lot of detail, but I think it's really healthy for horses to be out on pasture and utilize as much forages as possible. The upper left corner here is cool season grasses that predominate in the upper Midwest. We usually use that primarily in the hays. Orchard grass is a good hay, but if you looked at Kentucky bluegrass or ryegrass, could be good pastures added to this. Usually we add a little bit of a legume to the pasture to add calcium and protein, but predominantly we use grass to meet those requirements we just talked about. You can use oat hay and wheat hay, and these are basically the whole plant with the head on before the grain is taken off of it. So there's a whole plant there that's harvested, and that's pretty similar in composition to the good grasses. Why would you feed straw? Why would I even list straw? In times that we're really desperate, if you're out of hay, the horse still needs at least 1.5% of his body weight in forage, in fiber, in long stem fiber. I want to bring your attention to these 2 hands. The cubes are maybe made of alfalfa, but they're ground and then cubed. And what you're going to see on some of my slides is we need to have at least 3/4 of an inch of particle size to be able to maintain a healthy digestive tract, especially there in the hindgut and the cecum. So there may be that we need to use straw or poor quality grass and then add more concentrate, more nutrients in the concentrate. If you have a good hay, then we don't need to do that. I'll just touch on different types of forages here. In a normal market, and I'd say it's beginning to be more of a normal hay price market right now, these hay cubes that have 3/4 of an inch chop are expensive, and usually more expensive than hay. But the reality in some environments, in some markets, these can compete, and if you're hauling horses all across the country, this is an economical and consistent way to feed the horse. Most of the time, pasture and hay are the most economical ways to feed, and feed as little concentrate as possible. Pasture, when you see a number like this, and whether your forage agronomist says 1.5 acres per horse or 2.5 acres per horse. I talked with a lady in Laramie, Wyoming about an hour ago, and theirs is more like 7 or 8 acres per horse because it's so much drier. This is really to maintain a productive and nutritive pasture, not so much for the horse, but the pasture itself. So how you manage the pasture should be determined by whether or not you're using the pasture for a large portion of the nutrition, or is it just a turnout exercise. So pasture can go a long way, and then you just supplement. We only buy enough hay, frankly, to normally be able to feed from Thanksgiving until before Easter. But certainly you have to do more hay than that as we look at pasture. Stockpiling pasture I'm going to come back to in just a little bit as far as rotation and managing pasture, but you need to think about what are your resources. Do you have pasture? If you have pasture, maybe you need to divide it up the way we're going to show in a little bit and look at different management herds. Maybe you need to get them off of it, and stockpiling means get them off it early enough in the fall that you've got 6 or 8 inches of pasture going into the winter so you can turn them out and turn them on pasture pasture. Horse people in the upper Midwest especially are notorious for overgrazing and not ever letting it get up to 4 inches, let alone get down to 4 inches and then move it. So these are issues related to pasture management, and probably your county extension educator is as good a source as most as far as how to better manage the pasture part. Inventory, and this kind of overlaps with the last forages part. But as you look at hay, maybe before I talk about hay, I want to address these two plants. I was talking about overgrazing, and whether it be a grass or an alfalfa or a legume, if the horse eats the pasture all the way down to the ground, these rhizomes or these roots are actually damaged, and the energy for the plant is stored in that very bottom inch or two. And if the horse eats that bottom inch or two, you're really damaging the plant's durability, its plant's vitality, and you might not spend a lot more money renovating your pasture if you're going to let your horses eat your pasture down below 3 or 4 inches tall. Literally, you're just wasting your fertilization, your seed costs, your tillage costs, and you're not using the pasture, never letting the pasture give you a return. These comments and these words are really more about looking at the quality of the hay. If you don't evaluate the quality of hay and look for the most leaves, the most immaturity, in other words, the less flowers, the less seed heads, you're going to miss the boat as far as buying quality hay and getting a good bang for your buck financially with hay. Leaving hay out where it spoils or is wasted is another issue. This idea of forage testing, my experience is, as Gwen said, for a number of years working with horse owners, is nobody tests their forages for the quality of the forage before they buy it. Or very few of you. I'm sure all of you that would care enough to sign up for this program might do so, but normally even large stables don't analyze for the amount of calcium, the amount of phosphorus, the amount of protein, the amount of digestible energy until they have a problem. Then we go in and we analyze. But if you're going to really spend a lot of money on your hay, most of you spend more money on hay probably than any other expense. Maybe you're bedding, probably more than your concentrate. So you need to really look at what's the quality of hay that you're going to buy and how you're going to match it to the needs of the horse. There's some good publications. This is an Indiana extension pub, but there's some good publications on e-extension in the Horse Industry Handbook and other places to tell you how to take a sample. But you need to sample lots of bales of hay. You need to know if it's representing the field or the pack or the load of hay that you just got. So you need to know what kind of hay it is that you're going to deal with. I put the slide in here because usually in economic situations like this, when we have too many horses and we got too poor quality forages, we need to deal with these individual horses, and people say, well, maybe I ought to feed more to the whole herd. The reality is you don't need to feed more to the whole herd. You need to maybe look at the problem individual horses. So whenever you group feed, you potentially are losing efficiency, and some horses are going to get thinner. I'm of the opinion that some horses are going to get way fatter in that environment because of their dominance hierarchy in the herd. Probably horses have dental problems that haven't been detected, and we'll talk about that. But just because someone tells you that they're feeding 20 pounds of hay and 6 pounds of concentrate doesn't mean the horse gets all of that. Maybe it's wasted, maybe it's competed away and other horses get it. Do they have access? Do they have other diseases? So you need to kind of determine what's going on if this horse is going to lose weight. Obviously, if you're going to spend a lot of money on feed, you're going to be wasting an awful lot of that money on parasites. And if the horse can't chew it or eat it, there's a question that's being answered right now related to how the teeth look. And I'm more concerned about how the teeth function, how the teeth are able to prehense or take in the feed, and how they're able to digest. But we'll talk about that in just a second. There are so many good ways to prevent and then to treat parasites right now. That's why horses are living so much longer, but it also is saving us money because a horse that's dewormed and is healthy is able to take lots better advantage of the feed stuff. So all these things are important, but we need to just reduce the exposure, not just treat parasites, but reduce the exposure to parasite recontamination all the time. I mentioned the mouth, and I'm a firm believer that horses' teeth are not oftentimes treated in such a way that they're taking advantage of the feed stuff. We waste a lot of feed because the horses can't chew it. So the horse has to be able to take the feed in. That's the incisors. Horses have to be able to chew. Horses have to be able to chew long enough that the saliva stays in the mouth and the feed stuff stays in the mouth without gulping and taking it all down. If you see a horse tipping his head to one side or another, or maybe the tartar that was just mentioned is going to relate to like dogs where they have a lot of bad breath and they have periodontal disease. Certainly if the horse is losing weight, tossing his head, having trouble when he's bridled, these are all indications that there's more teeth treatment that's needed. This is what I'm of the opinion never or seldom happens in a mouth examination unless you're able to use anesthesia, unless you're able to use a mouth speculum and truly open the mouth up and see the back of the horse's mouth. I'm of a firm belief, whether it's a veterinarian or some other dentist you may have employed, if they can't see the back of the horse and they can't treat and evaluate those back half of the molars, you're going to have a serious, serious problem. I've taken old horses to dentists, to veterinarians that are dentists, and realized that our regular veterinarian really never saw the back of the mouth, never treated the back of the mouth. In fact, one veterinarian reached in and wiggled with his hand and pulled two back molars out by hand, and boy did that smell badly. So I'm not as concerned about the tartar as I am the health of the teeth, especially those that chew in the back of the horse's mouth. By the way, I should mention, looking at this slide, I'm not as concerned about whether they use power equipment as I am that they have a mouth speculum and they open the mouth all the way up. But certainly regularly needs to be treated, needs to be evaluated and checked for internal parasites as well. Dividing up the herd, this is just about our barn at home in this diagram. We have two horses that need to be fed 3 or 4 times a day. They need to be close to the barn and brought in where they can be managed separately. We've got some horses that do very well on a lot of pasture and a lot of hay, and they're kind of in the middle here in the bottom right. And then we have a fat lot. We have 5 horses in our barn that absolutely don't get any concentrate and haven't gotten any concentrate for over 3 or 4 years. The question is then, how do you provide the minerals and vitamins to those fat horses that kind of look at the hay and realize that they're going to get fat? And that's the trick. So you may want to separate your vitamins and minerals so that you can feed those to those fat horses with a very low amount of calories. You have to be able to divide up, and in this example we are going to rotate the horses around a little bit, and we're going to actually, we're saving 2 of our 2-acre paddocks at home right now to take a first cutting of hay. Then we'll rotate the horses to different corners, if you will. I'm going to start moving through these last bits a little quicker so that we can make sure we have plenty of time for questions. I was at a beef cattle symposium about a month ago that we were talking about wastage of hay, and unless you have some way to feed your hay out in the lot or in the corner of a stall or somewhere in a feeder, some places were wasting as much as 60 and 65% of the hay that they just threw into their mud lot or into their outside lots and so forth. Horses trample them, horses chew them, they walk on them before they eat them. So find some way, especially outside, and there's a lot of these commercially available. Some people just use old bathtubs and all kinds of things, but find a way to feed your hay in such a way that it's not wasted and thrown all over everywhere. We're seeing lots and lots of different ways of feeding horses right now. A lot of people are feeding soybean, not just meal, but the hulls, feeding bran, feeding dry distillers, and I would comment that probably you're not going to add a lot of DDGs or dry distillers, solubles, probably not more than 5 or 6% of the diet's going to be those, even though you're going to hear a lot of those as byproducts from the ethanol business. So be a little cautious with those. There's a lot of ideas as far as supplemental sources. I did want to talk very briefly about adding extra energy. Some of you have horses that you're afraid to add a lot of energy in the form of carbohydrates or polysaccharides. You can more efficiently add energy in the form of oil, and it can be corn oil, it can be vegetable oil, it can be linseed oil, it can be rice oils. Instead of worrying about omega-3s and omega-6s, I'm more interested that you add enough fat or oils, really, that can provide the energy that the horse needs. And there are a lot of products you're going to see. Nearly every company has a high-fat diet. But these are only for horses that are thin, horses that you're trying to put weight on. Someone just asked about some polysaccharide intolerance and all that. If you have horses that tie up a lot and have other problems, it might be worth trying to reduce the carbohydrates and increase the fats economically. Fat's been known to be very efficient in increasing energy. It's very dense. It's 2.25 times more dense than carbohydrates or protein. A lot of people overfeed protein, and as I said earlier, protein is very, very expensive. It takes heat to break the carbons away from the nitrogens and into the amino acids, and the horse has to drink a lot more water in order to break down excess protein. So it urinates more, and I think you're going to spend a lot more money. So you'd have to convince me why you're feeding a hay that has more than 16% crude protein, why you're feeding a concentrate that would have more than 11 or 12% crude protein. Be more concerned about the minerals than the protein and the fats, if you will, as far as especially horses that are overweight. I'm not going to go into lots of different sources, but most of the economical sources of protein are quite frankly soybean meal. Some people are going to other sources. There's no reason to feed casein or skim milk to adult mares. Most horses aren't going to eat fish meal and bone and meat meal. I mention this only because I want to make sure while we're reducing calories, we don't reduce the minerals. Horses always require more calcium than phosphorus. Be very careful with things like magnesium and potassium. Some of you may have halter type horses that are easily able to be affected by too much potassium. I've seen hay differ from 0.2 all the way up to 2.2% potassium, and that can really affect those of you that have horses that are HN for HYPP, for instance. This has been a very quick run through of lots and lots and lots of ideas related to feeding, and I think you're the fox in the middle. You have to think about how are we going to address these issues and still make sure my horse stays as healthy as he was before. Or maybe we can save money and make the horse healthier. I've become quite successful, quite frankly, in making people able to save money and have healthier horses. And one example I'm going to use as we get nearer the end of my comments are that some carriage horses in the city were getting a lot of muscle tying up problems and so forth, and I went to evaluate the situation. They had great hay, mostly alfalfa mixed with a little bit of grass hay. They were feeding a lot of concentrates. Their horses were in a body condition score of about 7.5, some of them 8, and they were having a lot of tying up, or what we call rhabdomyolysis, or exertional myopathies in their horses. And we evaluated the horses, and the problem was the public really didn't want to see ribs. And the proprietor knew that if she had ribs showing, then the public started to get bothered, even though she knew the horse would be healthier at 4.5 body condition score. People won't want to see ribs. So she had them so fat. And what I asked her to do is cut the concentrate in half and feed them as much hay as they would eat of that good hay. she saved a lot of money and they didn't lose any weight. And I said, cut it in half again and continue to work on them, and they can feed as much hay as they could. And she got down to where she was feeding less than a fifth of the original concentrate. Her horses were harder and fitter, a little bit thinner, and because she was still exercising them, they didn't have the muscle tying up problems that they had had before. She thinks I'm like wonderful, and I saved her money, her horses are healthy, and all I did is feed way less concentrate and a lot more hay. It's got to be good hay. It's got to be good hay that they can utilize and digest, but it also has to be balanced with a good source of minerals. I've mentioned a few other things here at the end, only to kind of remind you there's more to this list. Limit dense feeds. There's no reason, again, to feed these high protein, high concentrate kind of diets unless we have to. Certainly there are times we have to. Adjust rations when it's cold stress. What that really should mean to you is more hay and not more corn and more calories. Calories make horses fat. Certainly a horse's caloric requirement, energy requirement changes when it gets really, really, really cold or really muddy this time of year. But you can add heat with more hay. You can add calories with more concentrate. So if they need more calories, then feed more oil or more concentrate. If you need more heat, then feed more hay on these really, really cold nights, or the nights that you want to make sure that they're staying warm. The soil pH, the fertility, the pasture management is really only for those of you that are managing your pastures in a way to provide a lot of nutrients for the animal. And I'm of the opinion that most of you aren't managing your pastures very well to provide those nutrients. And the very last thing that I put on a horse list is something that the beef cattle and the dairy cattle people would have put first. Cull the horses that you don't need. Some horse audiences don't even know what this word means, so I want to make sure I'm talking about you need to decide how many horses you can take care of. And I really believe strongly in today's market, we have a lot of people that have horses that they really shouldn't have. We have a lot of people that have horses that are not able to take care of them as well as they would like to, and consequently they're thinner, and then we find neighbors that are upset, or we find those horses are not able to be sold for much of anything right now, so then we find a rescue center. Well, rescue centers in our part of the country are completely full, so I would challenge you to be responsible horse owners all the way to the end of the horse's life. If you can't take care of the horse and the horse has more bad days than good days, then you can find a friend, you can find somebody to adopt it. But the reality is maybe these old horses that are in my barn are to a point where some of them need to be euthanized, need to be ended their life in a humane way. And I think that's more humane, frankly, than just keeping them alive out in the pasture and finding people that can't take care of them. So I don't want to end this on just a sour note, but I want to tell you that there are a lot of horses right now that aren't being very well managed. And the public is seeing that, the public is hearing about that, and it's not very good for our horse industry. So I'm trying to take those of you that are conscientious owners, are really caring about your horses, and say, how could we do that and not spend quite as much as we did before? Now, hay prices are a little better now than they were a year and a half ago, but the reality is some people would be able to reduce their costs and still maintain the quality of their horses that we're trying to be able to give the best life. We are all here because we love the horse, we care about the horses, and I really want to compliment those of you that are online tonight, because you're the ones that are asking the good questions and really trying to improve the well-being of your horses. I said I would try to end before it was time to quit, and if there's any questions that I can take, I want to thank Dr. Skelly and Dr. Brady for helping answer questions. I'm looking down at the last 2 or 3 comments, and really it ends up with how are we going to deal with some of these horses that are not being cared for very well. We're looking at situations where management is a real problem. I'm going to just continue talking because that's what I do best. but I'll read the comments as I can here at the end. Somebody has 8 horses turned out on 40 acres of what they said is improved pasture. She says you mentioned spending a little bit of time and waiting 2 or 3 hours after they've eaten to exercise them, but you can't restrict how they eat all day long. And what I really meant was to wait a couple hours after a meal. After meal feeding, remember horses that are naturally nibbling 60, 70, 80% of the time always have a small amount of digestive in their tract all the time. If they eat a lot, then the reality is we have done a lot of curves of triglycerides or amino acids or glucose, and we know that between an hour and a half or 2 hours after a meal is when most of that absorption takes place. So I really meant 2 hours after a meal rather than just nibbling all day long. So that's a really good question, but I think that we've got to think about the horse and how the horse was designed. The horse is designed to nibble a little bit all the time, and that's really how those horses are best managed, I think, all the time. I'm trying to read other questions as we go along. Most of these that are coming in now are dealing with older horses that they've acquired. Someone is asking about a cushingoid situation of horses, and this is not all nutrition. There are some thyroid-related and metabolic diseases in horses that you can adjust with feeding, and you can feed them carefully and reduce the soluble carbohydrates, but the reality is some of these horses you need to make sure have a veterinarian or looking at the health management and the endocrine or the hormone balance in the horse. I have another question that says, how long should I wait to feed after an intense workout of 45 minutes for dressage? Obviously, I cool him down, but should I wait longer for optimal digestion? If it's intense, certainly you're going to cool him down and you're going to walk him out, and then I think you can feed him immediately. If the horse is cooled down and then you feed him, it's a lot healthier for the horse than if you're going to feed him directly before the exercise, for sure. Horse won't eat hay. Here's a comment about somebody saying my horses are out all the time, 24/7, and this is my wife's idea of ideal. If they're out all the time, then you can manage them and bring them in and exercise them, give them a little bit of snack to reward them for coming in maybe, and turn them back out. Some horses won't eat hay when they're on pasture that's so good, so we quit putting it out there. Sometimes when you first turn horses out on a really, really good pasture, you want to think about making sure they're full of dry hay before you turn them out. That's really a matter of getting their bacteria used to the digestive change from hay to lush pasture. Some of you have fat ponies that founder very easily on lush digestible pasture, so a lot of times we'll feed them full of hay and then turn them out for half days at a time. If you have really good pasture, to me, there's no reason to keep feeding hay. And in fact, if you keep feeding the same hay and the same diet, the same ration that you would normally feed, then what's changing? What's changing is the body condition score of the horse. The horse gets fatter when you have lots of pasture. It gets thinner when it gets to be summer and August and there's not so much pasture. So the reality is you're not taking much advantage of the pasture. You're wasting the money. And instead of you saving money, you're just putting more body calories on the horse. This person has a horse that has Cushing's and is the boss, and they keep hogging all the hay and eating all the hay and so forth. Oftentimes it's the boss horse or the subservient horse, the bottom horse, that needs to be taken out of that lot and fed separately. And when I said our thins and our fats, those thins, one of them is 39 years old, and one of the thins is the subservient shy horse that never gets to eat at all, because the fats, if you let our fats and our thins stay together, the fats get fatter and then founder. and the thins get thinner, and people wonder what we're doing wrong. So you got to be very careful when you feed horses in groups. Yep, somebody said you got to feed them separate them at feeding time. That's absolutely the case. I think that we're within, and maybe I haven't figured out how to read down through here, but I think we're caught up thanks to Chris and Colleen with some of these questions. But I guess my comments are that you cannot feed horses without handling them, without seeing them every day, without knowing them. Somebody, whether it's the manager of your barn or you, needs to be able to determine whether or not they are acting normally. Some horses, when they have feedstuffs that are not very good for them, meaning toxins and other things, end up in situations where their behavior changes radically. And that's really the problem you have. There's a question about bigger round bales outside. I have no problem with big round bales as long as they can be stored in and managed in a feeder, and that they are eaten before they just rot. So you have to have enough horses in order to eat the round bales in a timely fashion before the quality degenerates too badly. There's a question here about trying to keep horses, breeding horses and lactating horses on pasture and forage only. One of the big challenges in doing that, sorry, I've lost where I am here, is that when you improve the pasture, you've got to move the horses. If they let the pastures go, then I have to feed concentrates. Improve pastures. Somewhere in the middle of managing pastures is, I think, relying mostly on grass. When some people say improve, they mean it's fertilized. The pH is essential. The minerals are essential. But the reality is you don't have to have it so improved that you have a lot of forage in it. Part of it is how you divide it up. Electric fence, dividing up a pasture and letting horses eat it all down and then move them to another paddock, and another paddock is ideal. You have to be able to move the water when that happens, as well as you have to be able to move the fences as you go. But it's really a good management system that I don't think people take advantage of nearly enough. I think a lot of these questions dealing with pasture management need to be dealt with a local seed company and a co-op, but don't just rely on them. You need to take some soil tests and see what kind of fertility needs to be adjusted, what pH. You're wasting a lot of seed if you don't have a pasture pH that's going to be able to actually grow the pasture that you're trying to grow. There's a question here that I think either Dr. Brady is dealing with or I would like to ask about is I mentioned adding oil to feeds, and sometimes people add oil to contain the dust. Other times people add oil to be able to add energy. A lot of times we've traditionally had sweet feeds that added molasses to be able to allow the animal to eat more and be able to smell, and horses get kind of addicted, if you will, to the soluble carbohydrate that's in molasses. If you're not careful, molasses ends up being a higher soluble carbohydrate. I think that the question, I personally have reduced from 8% to 6% to 3%. An awful lot of sweet feed mixtures don't need near as much molasses, because if you're trying to feed it, it'll either become rancid or it'll become frozen and won't process very well. So you have to decide. I'd much rather have you feed some oil than I would molasses. this is a good response to somebody. They're using molasses the way I used Jello, frankly, growing up. Molasses, like you'd buy in a bottle, can flavor water. And I mentioned there's types of water where horses don't want to drink. We used to show at Harrisburg and Syracuse an awful lot growing up, and the water at Syracuse, no one would drink it in their right mind. So we added, you could add molasses, but we added just Jello to their tank at water at home, so they were used to drinking this flavored water as we went along. No, you don't boil the water. It'll all set up and be hard if you boil the water. That's a good question. I'm going to respond to this oil question. When you're talking about adding oil, some people have gone as high as 12 to 15. You saw one slide said 15% of the diet, not 15% of the body weight, 15% of the diet. So if you have a 30 pounds of hay and concentrate, and I want to correct that. I want to make sure it's 15% maximum of the concentrate. And usually just what you do is top dress with a half a cup of oil morning and night. Be able to increase it. A lot of times you can actually get it to where it's kind of a mash, but you want to increase it a little bit so they'll continue eating it. We also did a study when I was at Illinois looking at eggs. You can increase the oil and the protein a lot by just throwing some whole eggs. You can break them up, or you can watch horses eat around them and then realize they can eat them. That's a little bit of calcium, and that's a lot of protein, and energy can be added to that. According to my watch, we're right at 8 o'clock, so I want to thank you all, and you can continue to ask questions, but I think our time is about done, isn't it, Gwen?
Actually, yes, it is. Well, just to kind of wrap up things this evening, I'd like to definitely thank Dr. Russell for your presentation, and Chris and Colleen, thanks so much for helping to answer the questions. And of course, we'd like to thank all of you for listening and logged in. We appreciate your participation. We want to let you know that we won't be having any podcasts from June through August, as we know you're all going to be physically out in the barn with your horses and so forth this summer. But these free monthly webcasts will resume again this fall. They're going to start again in September. We're still finalizing. Actually, yes, it is. Well, just to kind of wrap up things this evening, I'd like to definitely thank Dr. Russell for your presentation, and Chris and Colleen, thanks so much for helping to answer the questions. And of course, we'd like to thank all of you who are listening tonight and logged in. We appreciate your participation. We want to let you know that we won't be having any webcasts from June through August, as we know you're all going to be busy out in the barn with your horses and so forth this summer. But these free monthly webcasts will resume again this fall. They're going to start again in September. We're still finalizing our topics and speakers and so forth, but once we have them finalized,
I want to thank everybody if I'm still on, and thank Chris and Colleen especially.
So if you have any questions,
this made it a lot more informative because I couldn't possibly have read and talked. I can talk, but I can't read and think at the same time. So thank you, Dr. Skelly.
And you can send us any suggestions.
Thank you, Dr. Brady. This is great. I can thank you without listening to you.
So just once again, we'd like to thank everyone for your attendance this evening, and I hope you have a great night.